Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions, the mystery of Pre-Adamites, the 17th century theory that shook the church. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. In 1655, a French theologian named Isaac La Peyrère published a book that caused immediate panic in the Catholic Church. He was arrested, forced to recant before the Pope, and his book was burned in multiple cities. His crime, he had argued using the Bible itself as evidence that human beings existed before Adam. La Peyrère was not an atheist. He was a devout millenarian who believed he had found the correct interpretation of Genesis. His argument was precise. Genesis describes the creation of the Jewish people, not humanity as a whole. The Gentiles, the peoples of Africa, Asia, and the newly contacted Americas, were pre-Adamites created earlier. This explains something that had genuinely troubled European scholars. Where did Cain's wife come from? Why did Cain fear meeting people after his exile? Adam could not be the father of everyone if there were already people in the world when his son was born. The church suppressed the book immediately. But the idea was impossible to suppress because the Bible itself appeared to raise the same questions La Peyrère asked. And 300 years later, population genetics would vindicate a version of his insight. The human ancestral population was never a single pair. There was no genetic Adam and Eve. There was only a statistical ancestor surrounded by thousands of other people. The Bible was right, and La Peyrère was right about different things. Which one matters more? This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the wider world of ancient technological anomalies, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. The official story of technological progress follows a reassuring arc. Stone tools giving way to bronze, bronze to iron, iron to steel, and finally, the Industrial Revolution catapulting humanity into the modern age. In this narrative, each generation inherits a slightly more sophisticated toolkit than the last, and no knowledge is ever truly lost. It is a comfortable story. It is also, in key respects, demonstrably false. History is littered with technological achievements that appeared centuries before their supposed invention, vanished after the cultures that created them collapsed, and were reinvented, often with great difficulty, by later civilizations who had no idea the knowledge had ever existed. Roman concrete was stronger and more durable than most modern concrete, and was not matched again until the 21st century. Greek fire, the incendiary weapon that protected the Byzantine Empire for centuries, has never been fully reproduced. Damascus steel, capable of holding an edge that modern metallurgists struggle to replicate, disappeared with the craftsmen who made it. These are not myths. They are documented historical losses of genuine technical knowledge. When we encounter an object from the ancient world that should not exist, a battery from Baghdad dated to the Parthian era, a computing mechanism salvaged from an ancient shipwreck, a map showing geographical features that were not officially discovered for another millennium, the temptation is to dismiss it as misidentified or misstated. That dismissal is sometimes warranted. But when such objects accumulate, when the pattern becomes too consistent to ignore, the honest response is to ask whether our model of ancient capability is simply wrong. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter, the core evidence surrounding Pre-Adamites. The 17th century theory that shook the church is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. Isaac La Peyrère was born in 1596 in Bordeaux, France, and served as secretary to the Prince of Condé. He published Pre-Adamites, Men Before Adam, in 1655, simultaneously in Amsterdam and London, to avoid French censorship. The book argued that Genesis was the particular history of the Jewish people under divine covenant, not a universal history of all humanity, implying that the peoples encountered in the Americas and Africa predated Adam. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen. Instruments malfunction. Researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the response to Pre-Adamites was immediate and severe. The book was condemned and publicly burned in Paris and Brussels within months of publication. La Peyrère was arrested in Brussels in 1656 while traveling with Condé's diplomatic mission. He was imprisoned and forced to travel to Rome, where he personally recanted before Pope Alexander Roman VII in 1657 and converted formally to Catholicism as a condition of his release. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. La Peyrère's Pre-Adamite theory was adopted in the 18th and 19th centuries to construct racial hierarchies. The argument that non-European peoples were biologically distinct pre-Adamite races provided pseudo-theological justification for slavery and colonialism. This appropriation was not La Peyrère's intent. He had argued for the spiritual inclusion of all peoples, but the theory's influence on racial pseudoscience is documented and consequential. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, La Peyrère's principal biblical arguments relied on internal inconsistencies in Genesis. He cited Romans 5:13, sin was in the world before the law was given, as implying the existence of human beings before the Mosaic covenant. He also cited Genesis 4, where Cain, after killing Abel, fears that whoever finds me will kill me, and later takes a wife, implying a larger human population than Adam's immediate family. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of John Walton, an Old Testament scholar at Wheaton College, published The Lost World of Adam and Eve in 2015, arguing that Genesis's Adam should be understood as a particular individual called to a specific covenant role within a wider, already existing human population. Walton's interpretation is designed to be compatible with the genetic evidence for a large human ancestral population while maintaining a historical Adam within a conservative theological framework. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. Modern population genetics has established that the human ancestral population never underwent a bottleneck, reducing it to a single pair. Analyses of genetic diversity consistently indicate a minimum ancestral population of several thousand individuals throughout evolutionary history. Mitochondrial Eve, approximately 150,000-200,000 years ago, and Y-chromosomal Adam, approximately 200,000-300,000 years ago, are statistical ancestors, not literal first individuals, who lived among thousands of contemporaries. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain pre-Adamites, the 17th century theory that shook the church. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that La Peyrére's original argument, Genesis is not a universal human history, but the particular history of the Jewish people under divine covenant. Adam was the first man of the covenant, not the first human. Other peoples, the Gentiles, preceded him. Proponent, Isaac La Peyrère. Pre-Adamites, 1655. Main objection, the argument is internally inconsistent. If Adam was not the universal father, the theological basis for original sin and universal redemption is fundamentally undermined. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that John Walton's 2015 theological interpretation, Adam was a historical individual selected by God from within an existing human population to serve a covenant and representative role. This interpretation accommodates both a historical Adam and the genetic evidence for a large ancestral population. Proponent, John Walton, Wheaton College. Main objection, the interpretation requires rereading traditional doctrines of original sin in ways many theologians find incompatible with Catholic and Protestant creedal commitments. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that evolutionary biology, modern humans Homo sapiens, evolved approximately 300,000 years ago in Africa from earlier Homo populations. The concept of a single genetic founding pair is incompatible with population genetics, which shows continuous human-to-human breeding across large populations throughout evolutionary history. Proponent, the entire field of modern evolutionary biology and population genetics. Main objection, none. This is the scientific consensus, based on multiple independent lines of genomic evidence. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree, that is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding Pre-Adamites, the 17th century theory that shook the church, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes La Peyrére's own biblical evidence. Genesis 4:14-17 describes Cain fearing unnamed people after his exile and then finding a wife. No woman is named among Adam's daughters at this point in Genesis, and no prior wife for Cain is described. These verses presented a genuine interpretive problem for traditional exegesis that La Peyrére's pre-Adamite solution addressed directly, forcing theologians to develop alternative readings of the same text. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented population genetics evidence. Studies of mitochondrial DNA diversity across global human populations establish a minimum effective ancestral population of at least 10,000 individuals at any point in human evolutionary history. The bottleneck required for a literal Adam and Eve does not appear in the genomic record. Ancient DNA additionally shows that Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans, species that predate any biblical timeframe by hundreds of thousands of years. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the distribution of human populations in the Americas, Australia, and the Pacific at the time of European contact presented a fundamental problem for traditional Adamic genealogy. These populations had been isolated for thousands of years, with no credible mechanism of descent from an Old World Adam within any biblical time frame. La Peyrére's pre-Adamite theory was the first systematic theological attempt to reconcile this demographic reality with a biblical framework. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding Pre-Adamites, the 17th century theory that shook the church. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. La Peyrére's Pre-Adamites is now a standard reference in the history of biblical criticism and early modern intellectual history. Richard Popkin's scholarship has established La Peyrère as a pivotal figure in the development of modern biblical scholarship. John Walton's Lost World of Adam and Eve, 2015, has sold widely in evangelical markets and represents the most sophisticated current theological engagement with the genetics problem. Population genetic evidence firmly places human origins in Africa approximately 200, 300 years ago. La Peyrére's racial hierarchy appropriators were thoroughly discredited. All modern humans are equally ancestral to the statistical mitochondrial Eve. The question of how to reconcile a historical Adam with population genetics remains an active and unresolved debate in evangelical and Catholic theology. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of Pre-Adamites, the 17th-century theory that shook the Church, from the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Pre-Adamites ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process, and the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment below telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.